I disagree with maybe the idea that you get these profound cardiovascular benefits from the training that we're doing. I mean, definitely there's an aerobic component to doing HIIT. You can feel it, your heart rate increases. But, with looking at it as a means to kind of improve your cardiovascular health.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni.com are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science co-author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, and trainer and founder of Bay.com, Drew Bay. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer, Simon Shawcross, who's also been a guest on the podcast. Simon has 15 years experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Steele, Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organized into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention there is a DIY course. So this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regime. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's HITUni.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10 for 10% discount. Thank you for your support. This podcast is brought to you by Vital Exercise, a one-of-a-kind personal training facility in the UK, owned and run by world-class personal trainer Ted Harrison. For over 30 years, Ted has been very successful in helping people achieve great results. And if you've seen the blog posts for his episodes on this podcast, you will see that he walks the walk. And at 56, he's a beast and in excellent shape. Operating from a high-intensity training base, Ted uses an eclectic mix of training styles to optimize results for his clients. Ted put me through one of the best workouts of my life and is someone I go to for advice often. To book a free consultation either at his facility in Essex in the UK, or to find out more about his virtual coaching, which includes personalized training, nutritional and motivational advice, please go to corporatewarrior.co/TED, where you can fill in a contact form or phone Ted directly. That's corporatewarrior.co/TED. Hi guys, I am Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior. It's a calm morning here in Galway, Ireland, and I'm feeling a little sore after day 3 on a 4-day canoeing course. And take it from me, if you're doing canoeing for the first time, best not to do a high-intensity training workout beforehand like I did, as today I'm feeling pretty damn exhausted and tired as a result. This podcast teaches you how to optimize productivity in health, career, business, and lifestyle by interviewing the most effective people I can find today. My guests include zero-carb world record holders like Sean Baker, sports scientists like Dr. James Steele and Dr. James Fisher, New York Times bestselling authors, highly successful business owners, extreme endurance adventure racers, biomechanics experts, and many, many more. So it's effectively, I try and find the best people at what I'm trying to learn and what I think you guys are interested in learning about when it comes to productivity in health, business, and lifestyle, and try and bring their knowledge to the table. My next guest is Dr. Tim Allerton, who joins me for a part 2 to expand on part 1 with regard to metabolic flexibility, damage control a la 4-Hour Body, and his HIIT Lab business. Tim is a postdoctoral fellow for the National Institute of Health and Pennington Biomedical Research Center. conducting research on metabolic resiliency. Wow. Tim earned his PhD in exercise physiology from LSU, where his research focused on metabolic flexibility in response to acute bouts of exercise. He was recently named National Scholar for the American Kinesiology Association. He's also an experienced trainer with over 10 years of experience working with clients and corporations, and is the founder of HitLab, a metabolic testing and consulting service. So in this episode, we cover metabolic flexibility. What is it and how does it work? We have an in-depth discussion on the damage control chapter in the 4-Hour Body, which is how Tim Ferriss was able to completely mitigate the fat gain effects from an enormous caloric load of strategic eating and intense exercise. We discuss the details around his HitLab business, how he came up with the idea, how it started, and how you can use the same process to validate your own business, and much, much more. For all the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.org. And don't forget to hang around till the end when you can learn how to get 6 podcast transcripts for free and receive my weekly updates. And now I give you Tim Allerton, PhD, Part 2. Tim, welcome to Corporate Warrior again for the second time.
Good to be here.
I would say long time no see or speak, but we have actually spoken quite recently.
Yeah.
It's unusual that I guess I get to schedule a part 2 so soon, but it was good because it keeps everything else fresh and we know where the gaps are and what other stuff we wanted to cover. So I just wanted to start off. I mean, I had a last minute question actually from I think a colleague or acquaintance of yours on Twitter. His name begets me now, but he asked about, metabolic flexibility, and he wants to know how it was measured. I'm not sure if that's something that we actually covered that thoroughly in part 1, kind of skipped over it. So could you just give the lowdown on, how you measure that and how it's then used, that data is used and that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, what we're looking for is we're looking to see after somebody eats how fast their carbohydrate oxidation, how fast they burn carbohydrates after they eat. And the most practical way to do that is utilizing something called a metabolic cart. And we use that metabolic cart to measure the exchange of gases, basically carbon dioxide and oxygen in somebody. So when they're breathing through this apparatus, we can actually measure the amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen that are coming out of them. And we can get an idea of the degree to which, after they eat, if their insulin sensitivity is appropriate and they're metabolically flexible, we'll see a precipitous rise in carbohydrate oxidation. And the number readouts on that, so there's something called the respiratory exchange ratio. And the respiratory exchange ratio is the ratio of carbon dioxide produced to oxygen consumed. So if they're producing a lot of carbon dioxide, that ratio starts to increase and it gets close to about 1. So we're looking at, going from fat oxidation, which would be in the 0.7s. So you'd be consuming a lot more oxygen than you're producing carbon dioxide. And then after you eat, we want you to start burning that carbohydrate because it shows your insulin sensitivity, driving that ratio, that respiratory exchange ratio, higher to 1. So the degree, the difference between those two is really what we call metabolic flexibility. How big of the difference you go from hopefully your fat burning to your carbohydrate burning, and then come back down after that.
So what do you see as what can be seen as like a very good measurement in an individual? What would you like to see?
Well, we'd like to see, your resting fat oxidation to be fairly high. So your RER, respiratory exchange ratio, in the low 0.7s. Some people, depending on just the diet that they eat, might come out a ratio a little bit closer to 8. But we'd like to see that shift, be about 0.1, basically. Going from a 0.8 to a 0.9 would be great. That would be a really dynamic shift.
Do you see like a difference between have you measured someone who's like very sedentary and pretty unhealthy versus like an elite athlete? Can you see a very big difference in this measurement when you do that?
Some people, the people that we've measured have been relatively young. I wouldn't say they're particularly fit, but just their relative youth and lack of any real comorbidities, they seem to be pretty metabolically flexible. So I don't really see a big difference between the healthy people that I measure and the extreme athletic population. So there doesn't seem to be this enhanced metabolic flexibility just by being in very, very good shape as compared to being just really healthy, which is a good sign because it doesn't say that you have to all of a sudden become, this extreme athlete or this, extremely well-conditioned person just to have the health-related benefits of, exercise.
Cool. I do want to get into kind of how that data is used and how you use it in HitLab for your clients, but I want to ask some other questions before we get there. So last time we spoke, we talked a little bit about the damage control section of 4 Hour Body, which for those that don't know is where Tim Ferriss basically consumed, and I actually looked it up this morning, consumed just over 6,000 calories in 12 hours, but he mitigated the effect by doing various protocols in the day. So he did workouts before and after meals. He did something called a PAG stack, which is a supplement stack to reduce fat gain. And he did some other kind of dietary hacks and things. And I just wondered, it's not something I've personally, I have done high intensity training deliberately before a cheat meal or before going out for dinner for the reasons we discussed before, emptying the glucose stores and making yourself more insulin sensitive and mitigating that kind of fat gain. And that can occur. So do you think there's value there? I mean, so in the 4 Hour Body, Tim is doing things like bodyweight squats, wall pushes and chest pulls, things of that nature before and after every meal, which isn't so practical. But how do exercises like that compare to, a sort of workout session to failure? Because he's doing reps for 60 to 90 seconds. And is that really going to empty glycogen stores and improve insulin sensitivity to a degree that would make that?
No, I don't think with the things that he was describing would really deplete glycogen stores. Just doing a set of body weight squats is not going to really have any substantial effect unless it's carried out for quite a long time. So, and that was really, it kind of gets to the question, what is the mechanism potentially of damage control exercise, doing these movements. And what he was trying, the theory was that, increasing your muscle contractions before you eat would bring the transporters that are responsible for bringing glucose into the muscle cell closer to the surface of the muscle cell where it can actually work a little bit faster. And we do, that is substantiate. The research does show simply by contracting your muscle, you can bring those transporters called GLUT4 to the surface of the muscle cell and to bring in glucose much more quickly and more efficiently. I guess the key is how much do you need to do to get to that point? So high intensity exercise and high intensity training might get to that, but it also might be too much of a hammer, in terms of the kind of metabolic upheaval to really see any real benefit in terms of, having your training in proximity to when you're eating. There might be a little bit too much there in terms of what's going on metabolically for us to, it might be working, but I don't know if diagnostically we could see that well enough. I don't know if we have enough high resolution techniques to, because after you do a high intensity training workout, you would expect, your blood glucose is going to be lower because you got this increased insulin sensitivity. When in fact, in many times it's actually higher because basically you've send all these hormones through your body, and those hormones, the purpose of them are to mobilize fuel, mobilize glucose, mobilize fat, mobilize protein, and that has a profound metabolic effect. So, one of the reasons I did my dissertation study was to kind of see what is the timing effect. We do have people do interval exercise, interval training, on a bike, and we have them eat an hour later. An hour after, do you still get that effect where you have this increased, damage control effect, for lack of a better word? So, I think that there's some potential there. The timing and proximity, the timing around when you eat, I'm not positive. It looks like damage control might be occurring just because simply you're fit. So, if you look at it, is it the dose response? If I do X exercise, if I do this exercise, will it impart some kind of protective effect on me just solely based on that bout? Maybe. we have some pretty good data that says it will, but it might just be the fact that, you're this well-trained person, and then looking at it, as protecting yourself from that cheat meal might not be as important. So it actually is good news for me, because you say that, you don't always have to do some kind of exercise right before you work out to get, protect, it might be good, if you think you're going to have a really big meal to exercise. But there's also some data that suggests that, lighter, moderate intensity exercise after you eat is also pretty effective at accomplishing the same thing. So by eating, increasing your blood glucose concentrations, but then doing even something as simple as a 10-minute walk might be effective enough to kind of take some of the edge off of that, that damaging meal.
Why is that? Why would something low intensity like that?
It's the same principle of looking at that GLUT4 transporter at the surface of the muscle. By contracting those, what you're doing is you're allowing your body to catch up. So you get this higher glucose level, and then you have this constant muscle contractions, whether you're doing something very light, bicycling or walking, where that muscle will take in that glucose throughout the course of that walk the whole time. So it's going to be taken. So it has the same effect. Whereas in the damage control model, the idea was, to get those transporters, translocated, as we call it, or by depleting muscle glycogen, you create this void that can be filled by the meal. So I think you can accomplish it in a few different ways. So that's one kind of the things that I've come to find in the research that I've done, is that, you can accomplish things, but in different ways. And for some people, after doing something very intense, glycogen depleting, the last thing they want to do is eat. It's hours before they can eat. So they might get that, I don't know if you want to have a glycogen depleting bout of exercise before you go out on a Friday night, but it just depends.
Yeah, good point. It's interesting what you just said, because I don't know, you probably might know this better than I do, but back in the day, so I think Victorian times or whatever, people would, families would have a meal and then they'd go for a constitutional afterwards, which, if my understanding's right, that's like going for a walk after their meal. Uh-huh. And I'm wondering whether the logic's aligned with what you just said, whether it's like, helping that food metabolize and using the muscles in order to, upregulate what you just mentioned. So
yeah, I think there's value in that. I think there's a lot of value in that. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that kind of slow process after, just taking a little bit of the edge off. It may make a big difference in your body composition. It might not, but it might curtail some of that. I think it's not very metabolically disruptive too. So if you're just going for a walk after a meal, that is not something that's going to really disturb, how the food is emptying from your stomach and into your intestines. So, it's something called gastric emptying. And after really intense exercise, your gut is very permeable. You have lots of gastric emptying occurs very quickly. That might not be a good thing. Do this really intense exercise where you have this kind of leaky gut, and then you give yourself a really, damaging meal. That might not be the best combination. So, it's just, I think it's different ways to get to the same outcome. I think you can do, but the data that we've seen recently, I just wrote a commentary for the Journal of Obesity looking at, they trained some rats, for 4 weeks, and they gave them a high fat diet. And what they were able to show is that their fat cells still worked really well after they gave them this really damaging diet, only because they did this exercise training. And they hadn't exercised for 4 days after. So it seems to be this carryover effect. The data that I have in humans, we see that 2 days after doing just high intensity interval exercise, 48 hours after doing that bout, you still seem to have some kind of metabolic benefit that occurs when you eat, which is really, really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I guess if you're training pretty regularly, again, obviously this, caveat this by saying that there's obviously variability between people and depending on how hard you're training, all of that. But, I'm working out pretty regularly at the moment, as we were talking about last time, like 3 times a week, to failure, kind of moderated volume, but 2 to 3 times a week. And in basketball, so could be, really kind of always in that elevated state almost all the time, right?
Well, I'd say the more, so if you're increasing your frequency, the more trained you are, the more well-trained you are. Fitness is not just, how long you can run, how hard you can push. It's really resiliency. And when you become more fit, you become more resilient to everything. And in fact, that extends to the actual exercise bout. So if you're doing 3 days a week, pretty intense, very intense, you're doing high intensity exercise to failure, those individual bouts, in terms of the way I look at exercise, may have less, metabolic impact in terms of what they stir up in your body, but they're still providing you with benefits of it. It's just you can respond, you can adapt and bounce back a lot quicker. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I'm just wondering, actually, going back to the damage control piece. I know in 4 Hour Body, and I know everyone's going to be going, why are you talking about Tim Ferriss 4 Hour Body? Because obviously it's very anecdotal. You can't really take it you have to take it with a grain of salt and self-experiment or do more research. But it's still very, very interesting, the stuff he's done. I mean, he's opened the door to a lot of these things.
No, I think it is. And I am a big proponent of taking what we see in the training world and saying, is there something to this? Is there something to that? Because this is a very simple concept, and let's see if we can actually test it experimentally. Because if we can, bringing science to people, I think would really help. It's either going to do one of two things, maybe even three things. It's either going to confirm it, strengthen it, and then we can build upon it, or it's going to reject it and say, okay, maybe this doesn't exist. And both are equally as valuable. Or there's a third component, maybe where, it does work, but under these conditions. People really hate, when you're talking science, it's very frustrating for lay people to hear, well, it depends. That's a big thing that we say a lot. It depends. Well, it depends on this. It depends on, it's very hard to talk in absolutes. But with the damage control hypothesis or this theory, I was like, this is a fairly simple concept in terms of, does exercise have a protective effect? Does we think it does, but does it have a protective effect? Is it a dose response relationship? And that's what's really interesting.
Yeah, because what I was going to want to say is, when Tim Ferriss is when he explains the slow carb diet, which I've done. I used to do a slow carb diet. I did it for years, and I stayed at 10 to 12% body fat. I wasn't as lean as I am now, but I think it's one of the better diets in terms of compliance. I actually think it's really good. I mean, I know a lot of people aren't a fan of it because it's got this whole cheat day aspect, but there is utility in that, and I do actually think
I do think so. I think so too. Yeah, I think so too. When I first read that, I was studying, ketosis and all these other things, and I go, this is a real practical model for how you now I think where we could, where people get into the weeds, like, what is the mechanism of how it works? It shows it's effective in these people. Is it more effective than this diet or that diet? I don't even think is a relevant question. I go, it's effective. Okay. Now, are the proposed mechanisms of how it works accurate? I'm not sure about that. We'd have to really but for somebody that lost 50 pounds, I don't think they care a lot about the mechanisms. They just want to know that it works and that they can stick to it because, you can give them any numerous diets. You can lose weight, but can you stick to that?
Yes.
So if I see somebody losing, 75 pounds, that's something I go, okay. And it's something I can stick to. I'm going to be a proponent of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think obesity is something that is far more important, reducing that, than it is worrying about some of these kind of nuances. But what is interesting is he says, and this is something that, I've certainly, it goes back to what we were saying about that damage control. He says when you're doing the slow carb diet, if you're on a normal day, non-cheat day, then you can eat carbs, be it brown rice, whatever, something that's going to elevate insulin, so long as you do some sort of intense workout before. Now, I know that a lot of my listeners aren't necessarily advocates of high fat, low carb. I'm a little bit more open-minded about it these days. I'm not so cut and dry, and I have carbs like we talked about before. I have carbs almost every day. That wouldn't be allowed on the slow carb diet. But I was just thinking about what you said earlier. So let's say you do an intense workout, right? And then you it's funny because you might look at that mechanism and go, oh, great, I can have, I'm doing the slow carb diet. I can have brown rice or, like burrito, whatever it is, like straight after the workout. But you did say earlier about the permeability of the gut. So you could be perhaps in danger of, I don't know, having some other issues, maybe like, I don't know, autoimmune disorders or inflammation or something like that. So, no, again, this isn't a concern of the...
More practically, it would be something called gastrointestinal distress. That would be, and you can read between lines in that. Basically, that would be the primary issue. That other stuff, inflammation, autoimmune stuff, that could happen over a long period of time. But I understand what you're getting to. It's definitely, and I don't think that people in the high intensity training community in general, and anybody that's a proponent of high intensity exercise, I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you look at exercise as a way to cheat the system and to look at, this for that. Because I do think if you're more fit, then you can have carbs. And I don't know if you're a really fit person and you do an intense workout as a means to mitigate the damage of a big high fat meal or high carb meal, whatever it might be, I don't think it's going to even have the same impact as it did when you kind of just got started out. So it might be a nice little tool, a mechanism to kind of like wrap your mind around eating something that you think it might be really bad for you in your cheat day. But I think just being fit in general is a good solution for that. And you can only stress that system for so long until it kind of gives out. So, if it's every once in a while, it's not going to have a huge impact on you. You're going to be pretty resilient to it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to wrap that little bit up, because I like your message there that it's like, don't abuse that as a kind of a strategy. And
if you go quid pro quo, if you go this for that the whole time, you're going to be in a fairly big metabolic disrupt, because what you're doing is you're taxing the system on one end with these, stress hormones. And on the other end, you're taxing these, metabolism, postprandial eating hormones or satiety hormones that are involved in the regulation of how much you want to eat. And that could be a tricky balance to handle.
Yeah. I just wanted to kind of like, I guess, wrap up the kind of high intensity training stuff quickly by asking you, everyone I have on the show, I've had a lot of people that have their own views on resistance training or evidence-based exercise, high-intensity training, whatever you want to call it. And I wondered, within that kind of, because you've practiced that type of training for a long time and you're a fan of it. But what is it within high-intensity training that you don't agree with? Aside from, we talked about, obviously, the frequency piece last time, but what in addition to that is, if anything, do you just disagree with or kind of depart from the usual paradigm?
Yeah, there's an aerobic component to doing HIIT. You can feel it. Your heart rate increases, but looking at it as a means to kind of improve your cardiovascular health, I'm sure it does something to that effect. But in terms of comparing it to being very aerobically active, in terms of lots of exercise, I don't think it gives you this. I don't think it covers that base as well. There's just not enough frequency there. The cardiovascular and skeletal muscle enzymes that are involved in endurance exercise, the things that we really think of as imparting this cardiovascular adaptation, I don't think it was involved when you're only doing it, for the people that are doing the traditional once every 7 to 10 days, because that effect of that bout is going to start to decline after a period of time. You might get the neuromuscular and physical skeletal muscle adaptations in terms of increased hypertrophy, strength, and you might feel great, but I think we're extending the effects of HIIT a little too far in terms of the cardiovascular benefits. I do think that they help. It's better than doing nothing, but I just think that a little more frequency probably required to get at that. I know a lot of people say there's no such thing as cardio. And I would agree, there's your heart and lungs don't know the difference between running on a treadmill, on a bike, or if you're on the leg press doing 600 pounds for a time under load of, 2 minutes. That's pretty stressful aerobically. But I think that's where, maybe the HIIT community, we get a little too carried away with, these I think we do need some more stimulus in terms of other kinds of exercise, other kinds of movements.
Can you elaborate, like what? I mean, I know we talked about your regimen before, but I'd be interested in, like, what do you think would be a good blend of?
I think
stuff?
it's kind of vanilla and kind of boring, but getting the daily guidelines, the weekly guidelines, 150 minutes of physical activity, I think is a good place to start. I think it's not very exciting, but we're talking about doing the minimum amount of exercise to get the most benefit that you can get from it. Or 70, there's another way to look at it. Instead of the 150 minutes, getting that 75 minutes a week of more intense aerobic activity. And what I mean aerobic activity is traditional types of things. Just something where you're getting enough frequency and enough intensity, challenging those systems, so you can actually reap the benefits from them. Because with HIIT and the cardiovascular stuff, it's a different mechanism. The fatigue mechanisms are working a lot differently, and they're going to cause your cardiovascular system to adapt a little bit differently as well. So it's not like, the same stress. It's not apples for apples necessarily.
Would you throw walking in there, or is that not really?
Yeah, I think that anytime you're breaking up your day with physical activity, even it's 10 minutes at a time, it's called exercise snacking. Has been a new term that's kind of popped up, and taking these little bites. And I think those definitely, especially if you're in poor physical condition, if somebody is not in very good fitness, doing those 10-minute walks are going to have a very profound effect. But when you get to somebody like yourself that is, fit and been training for a long time, you might be fine cardiovascularly just getting the kind of exercise that you're getting 3 days a week doing that. But you got to think about what are the more general applications for this. And I think a lot of people don't have the ability to get this kind of technique of training, of high intensity training in. We should be emphasizing, yes, we want you to do HIIT because we see the benefits of it, but also do some of this too, because it's really gonna help. And I wouldn't be confident as a practitioner saying to everybody, everything is covered in this 30-minute session. We have to be a little bit more reasonable.
Cool. Okay, so I want to ask some questions about your HIIT Lab business. Can you describe, I guess, to listeners, what is HIIT Lab, what do you do, and that kind of thing, just to give an introduction on that? Yeah,
sure. So, like I was mentioned last time, I came at a crossroads where I was doing a lot of research and working at the medical school, and I kind of understood all these metabolic research techniques, but I was also had a high intensity training business where I was taking several sessions a week, working many hours in the gym at night and mornings with people, and I was thinking to myself, like, what is eventually going to separate me? And I think people, they valued the fact that I was in a academic research setting and I can kind of bring maybe some cutting edge, knowledge, technique, science to them. So I said, okay. I also was studying high intensity interval training at the time, and I saw this gap that was kind of missing in the high intensity training model where, I have clients that I don't feel are getting the aerobic stimulus that they need from their training. Because there's just a dynamic range of people's capacity to train high intensity training. And I go, and also there's additional concepts. Okay, are they getting it the most metabolic bang for their buck? So the first part of HIIT Lab was, okay, let's just introduce high intensity interval training using like a bike and adding that to their regimen, and maybe giving them some additional value for their training, training in high intensity training. They're also getting this additional component because I saw it was kind of it was lacking.
Where were you training these clients at the time?
So we were training at one-to-one personal training. And then then Ryan Hall and his business partners parted ways, and he was at Exercise Science and I was at something called Slow Motion Exercise, SMX. And I established the bike and HIIT Lab concept at Exercise Science with Ryan. He had more space, so we decided to kind of implement it there. So what we do is we take clients and, on their off days, we would actually do 2 or 3 days a week of interval training. And I kind of developed some models of some practical ways to, test somebody for their ability to how much power could they put out on the bike, and then make some adjustments in terms of, how many intervals are they going to do? And then, just kind of we kind of treated it like a pilot study. We go, okay, we don't know what to expect in this clientele. What are we going to get? So we spent about 2 months just taking people, giving them free sessions, and let's just see if this model works of can we incorporate this into the current HIT model. And we did pretty well with it. We had a lot of people that enjoyed it tremendously, saw a lot of benefits from it. Whether it was, did the interval training help them lose weight? It'd be hard to kind of parse out that, but it definitely improved their metabolic health. And then the other component of HIT Lab was I brought in my metabolic card. So I was able to purchase a commercially available metabolic card and do resting metabolic rate measurements and do VO2 max fitness assessments and really get some hardcore data on our clients. And it took off great. The first month, I think we did first 2 months, we did over 100 resting metabolic rate tests. So that concept, the way I figured is, okay, let's try to bring science and let's try to bring some of these cutting edge techniques to practitioners and facilities that are confined to this one model. You do strength training, or you do aerobic training, you do CrossFit, or you do TRX training. So can we add value to your current business? And that was the model.
So is that a business that you've gone into partnership with Ryan on? Like who owns that business, so to speak?
Well, I own it, and I've actually since I've taken on more research responsibilities, I've actually been able to be more of a consultant now for it. So now it's implemented in Ryan's facility, and there's other versions of it all throughout the city, through New Orleans, that have adopted the techniques, and we've kind of established them, set them up, come up with some kind of compensation plan. But then my idea is I move out of that space, and we've established a relationship as it. So now I don't work one-to-one with people as much anymore, or at all. I don't do any of my own training. I'll do some testing and assessments here and now, but now it's really to get other groups set up. And then they can utilize our equipment. They can utilize our expertise in terms of, and I say I have another person that helps me with some things. I've taken on some interns that have done some work with me now too. But really, in terms of a business, I never saw myself as being somebody that was going to be there every single day, testing every single person, training every single person, because I have other interests and other pursuits that I like to. But it was a really fun experience and a really rewarding experience to see how these people were adopting this technology and understanding, the benefits of, okay, let me get some real data. What is my resting metabolic rate? Because we'll say, okay, well, you need to be, first of all, you need to eat less calories. Well, how many calories should I be eating? So if you look up, an equation, you could be 30 to 50% off.
Really?
So really focused on getting hard data on our clients. And then we could use the data to have them trained, and then come back and do a retest and see, look at this improvement. You've lost weight. We're looking at your metabolic flexibility numbers, and you're looking like you're burning more fat. And that's really reinforcing to the person.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, because even if they're not seeing, because obviously most people rely on the scales, which is probably like the worst tool to use to measure progress in fat loss. So if you've got other metrics to look at, other ways to measure your progress, that can be very motivating, I imagine, to clients.
So sometimes it confirms their bias. It can confirm their bias, because what we get is a lot of people that are very, they're overweight and they're adamant that, well, I just have a slow metabolism. And then when we show them the actual numbers, you go, actually, your metabolism is a little bit, above what we'd expect somebody at your weight. And it can say, okay, well, this is your bias, or it actually rejects their bias in that case, where we say, okay, they think this. And then when we kind of turn and say, here are the actual numbers, this is what actually you need, that kind of makes them think, okay, well, maybe I need to reassess how I eat or how much I eat. I think that's a good tool. It's, it helps bring some reality to the situation. It makes something that's very abstract in terms of metabolism and metabolic rate and calories, and actually puts it on paper. And we say, okay, well, this is what you are. This is what you do.
What is the formula that most people default to when they're working out resting metabolic rate?
There's
Because I've used one and now I'm doubting its accuracy.
the classic formula is by Weir, Weir. It was developed a long time ago, 60s and 70s.
Right.
There's also this technology is extreme. It's over 100 years old. The concept of what we call indirect calorimetry, measuring carbon dioxide and oxygen to get to metabolism, because the byproducts of metabolism are oxygen consumption and carbon dioxide production. Very simple concepts, but they're very accurate under controlled conditions. For each person that we did, we had them do at least a 10-hour fast, and we had our measurements taken first thing in the morning. So we try to control some of the variables. We had them in a seated, relaxed position. Under those circumstances, it's very accurate, very reproducible testing.
Cool. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand your business. So you've got, it almost sounds like you've franchised it out. Is that fair to say, or is it not quite that model?
The idea was to, okay, can we incorporate this new model into your business? Can we add something? Can we bring value to your business by bringing our expertise in technology? Then we establish that. And then what we do basically is work out a consulting deal where, okay, when your clients need testing, we're the people that you go to for that. And all the training stuff you do is yours. Your clients are yours. But what we'd like to be a part of is the metabolic testing applications of it. So we can be it, because a lot of, if you're a trainer and you're training 70 clients a week, you don't have a lot of time to okay, let me learn a completely new technology and let me learn a completely new way of thinking about these things. It'd be a lot easier to outsource that to somebody that does it, like in my case, for a living.
Yeah.
But it doesn't detract from my current practice. It only adds value to that. So the idea was incorporate what we do, train their people on how to do interval training, utilizing the technology that we have. We actually have something called the bioharness, which is a really cool heart rate monitor. Gives you great output on a screen. You can look at it. You can track people over time. So doing that, and then having us do the testing for them, because the equipment is mobile. It can be brought anywhere. It's like in a suitcase. So establishing that is we become a part of their team, not competing with them.
So you kind of have a team or a small team that can go out to site to these various facilities and actually do this sort of stuff? Yeah,
so we do the testing, and then they'll bring they'll bring the numbers back to me, and we'll talk about it, and then we'll generate reports and then give them some guidance. When we have somebody that, for example, is, has a metabolic rate that is, pretty high, but they're overweight. And we look at, how well you're burning fat, and the numbers sometimes we'll work out and okay, well, you're burning a lot of calories, but your respiratory exchange ratio is like 0.88. So you're burning a lot of carbohydrate. You go, okay, well, maybe the best approach for you is, since you're already burning a lot of calories, how about you reduce your carbohydrate intake? And let's see if that will help restore, improve your fat burning a little bit. And we'll try to or if somebody in the opposite case will go, their metabolic rate is lower than expected, but they're burning a lot of fat. We go, okay, well, this is a person that, in order to maintain your weight or to lose body fat, we might need to add more exercise on a daily basis to your regimen, because you're doing great burning fat, but you're just not burning enough of it. That might be, does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, so if someone, that first example you gave, where someone is burning a lot of calories but not burning much fat, would that mean that that might also translate into them being more hungry more often? So they'll be, because they're not losing weight, then they're probably eating more because they're constantly burning carbs. They don't have that metabolic flexibility that you're describing. Is that correct?
I think it's definitely in the realm of possibility. Oh. There are some big studies that are coming out where we look at lots of people, and the regulation of appetite and how many calories you burn on a day are pretty well associated with each other. So people that are burning a lot of calories, they're burning a lot of calories. Their satiety hormones might be out of whack, and they might be eating a lot too. A lot of times we'll see somebody, they'll be coming in 10 hours fasted, and we'll see their respiratory exchange ratio is pretty high. We go, what did you eat the night before? And they'll explain what they ate, and it was a fairly mixed diet. And I'm like, well, you're still burning carbohydrates. You never actually got back to burning fat the way you were supposed to. So Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. What's the mechanism of that? Not quite sure. A lot of people suspect that it's high insulin. Um, that's highly debated right now. There's a lot of old studies that suggested that, but some of the recent data, is kind of we're at a crucial point right now of this whole insulin hunger theory, where there's going to be some new studies that come out in the next couple of years that hopefully will either confirm or dispel, or the classic "it depends" line will come through.
Cool. Just going back to your business for a second. So how is it you spend your time at the moment? So you're kind of, I appreciate you're not as hands-on with the HitLab stuff as in actually there with the clients, because you've kind of have a team, but you've also trained gym staff to do that within your clients. So you've obviously alluded to this already, but how is it you spend your time at the moment? Like, what are your main kind of like, you're obviously a researcher, but then you've got HitLabs. How is it kind of split up at the moment?
So I've had to prioritize my research and academic endeavors a little bit more recently, because I've recently taken on a pretty substantial postdoctoral fellowship that's going to require a lot of my time. So I made the decision to kind of step back a little bit. I always have the HitLab business to work on, because I'm really passionate about still getting these techniques and measurements into people's hands. But it's sustained enough to the point where, and I don't really need to seek out a lot of new business, even though I always welcome it. But really my day, is mostly focused on the current research projects I have going, the manuscripts that I'm writing. As a scientist, you need to publish. So I've been trying to increase my efforts in terms of getting the research that I've done out there, because I really do see myself more in the academic research side of it. It's just where my interests are. But I always look back to the training and HIT, having a business practice and having the HitLab thing. It was a great way to teach me more about the public and what the public perceived about science, and how they actually appreciated what science could to bring to them. So I do want to keep that going in terms of advocacy, and I still think it's a viable financial model. It's just it's how much do you want to work? How busy do you want to be? I spent the last 5 years, working 3 jobs, getting my PhD. So I'm really trying to actually take a little bit of a step back, catch my breath, and enjoy my kids, enjoy my family, and just become a little more balanced. That's really my goal right now. So eventually, maybe I'll get a little more busy, but who knows?
You were like PT, HitLab, and doing your PhD. That's what you mean by the 3 jobs. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Just trying to paint a picture of your life. It's interesting. So
it was very chaotic. Ryan Hall definitely remembers the times where I was getting all this started up, and I was so excited to get everything started up, and then your flame just burns so hot, and then when things calm down a little bit, it's like you really I really felt like I needed to recharge my batteries and reassess, like, where's the market going now, because there were some places where people weren't as receptive to bringing in this new technology, and they didn't see it the way I saw it. And it kind of gave me a chance to take a step back. Okay, well, what does the industry value? What do people value? And then reassess.
Cool. So this is very impressive. This like, because you've obviously had a lot of success with this entrepreneurial venture, and I'm assuming it makes you a side income now whilst you're doing your stuff now. So that's excellent. How is it? So tell us, like, okay, so you set it up. Obviously you had I guess it was helpful setting that up in Ryan's gym, because immediately you had people there that you could demonstrate this technology with and gather data. And then you could obviously then use that, I suppose, I'm making assumptions now, but how did you get other gyms on board? How did you market this service?
Yeah, well, so for the interval training aspect of it, it was easy to set up in Ryan's facility. But I was at my own home gym with Emil Tujak at SMX, Slow Motion Exercise, where we didn't have the space to do the interval exercise, but we definitely had space to do the metabolic rate testing. So I tried to tap 2 resources. Initially, I got a lot of great advice, starting out business. Even when I started out personal training, I was training friends and family. So I felt these 2 guys, they're like friends and family. Let's start it here, so I don't have to invest a ton of time and effort in getting, wedging myself into facilities. when I went out and I pursued other places to get integrated in, was my first thing was, okay, I'm not here to compete. I'm here to bring value, and try to remove the specter of, okay, I'm going to poach people. I'm going to take clients from you. Cause these are people's, this is their life. This is their, their living. So if you're a gym owner, you don't want somebody to be, so I really brought it up as a service. I'm not a facility. Not a brick and mortar facility. Although it could easily be transitioned to something like that. It's just not something I viewed myself doing, as running a studio where I have all these other costs and expenses.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been smart to do that, would it?
No, and it was, the amount of risk that I was willing to take to get started with it. I felt comfortable with it. So going into, a new facility, it was, okay, let me get an idea of what kind of clients do you have? And then where can I tailor my services best to your clients? So if you have a lot of people that are, endurance athletes, they come in for your spinning classes and they come in for your group exercise courses, they would be really interested in what we do for VO2 max. What we do for testing applications. If you have triathlon clubs that come by, if you're a triathlon coach, how can I add this service to you? Or if the focus of your practice, your business is weight loss, I can give you the data you need to get good data on your clients for metabolic rate. We've also had some good success working with dietitians. Okay, dietitians, the first thing they do is how many calories you need, but none of them have a metabolic cart. So immediately I fill a void right there. I add value right there. So really, it was identifying where I could help, and then see, okay, is there somebody here I can train and work with equipment on, and how much effort do I need to put in? There were some places that were very natural fits. Like the places like spinning studios that, like, okay, people are interested in their metrics because they love seeing the screen, love seeing how many watts they're pushing out. So kind of tailoring it to particular groups. So just trying to be savvy about, okay, come in with respect for the business, respect for what they've built, and then say, okay, what can I add? And that seemed to be the most successful route.
Yeah, so I should also say you were a personal trainer before, and you had is it true you had your own personal training business, or did you?
Yep.
You
I
did.
did.
And you were working people out from home, your home, is that right?
No, I was actually,
Okay.
I was training it started out at one-to-one personal training. When I started out a long time ago, it was in my undergrad, I was just training people at the college rec center. And then I went, got my master's, and then I trained people at different rec centers. And then when I moved back to New Orleans in 2008, that's where I found one-to-one personal training. It was a hit. It was the best hit training studio around. So that's where I met Ryan Hall and became familiar with him. And over the last 10 years, I've been able to train, almost 10 years, been able to do hit training. And just until recently, the last 3 months, I've actually stopped doing personal training, and I was able to set my clients up with another trainer that I trusted. And it's worked out so well for them this far, but it was definitely a hard transition to make, going from, seeing people every single week, establishing this training business that you work so hard for. But it was just time for me to kind of reprioritize. And I never thought I'd be training for as long as I did. I kind of viewed it as like, yeah, it's a temporary thing. But the more I trained, the more clients I got. It kind of started to snowball. And but yeah, I had a training business for quite long. I was just training, at the different facilities.
I think this is good because it's. I love this idea of validating a business before you invest tons of time and energy and money into it. And you kind of did that with the personal training. What you were saying there, you're actually training friends and family to begin with, and you didn't, go and buy a facility or invest a ton of time until you knew that your Hit Lab concept was going to be somewhat successful and that you had interest. And I think that's really important to highlight, because a lot of people spend so long, some of my friends included, and just people like me, spend such a long time spending so much time and money on a business, which, when they actually launch it, no one wants to buy it, It
was the industry research that I looked at that time. Being in fitness for so long, I had so much time to kind of to take in where was the industry going, and just kind of like see what's out there, drive around, look what kind of fitness studios are popping up, what kind of gyms are popping up. And it's like this big divide of gyms that are popping up. Is these either really cheap facilities where you pay $6 a month and you get access to, all their terrible equipment, their, unqualified staff, or you have like this really nice facility with all this great technology and training and expertise. And so I just viewed it, where am I? And I go, I want the industry and society is moving more towards technology and science. It's becoming more important, not less important. So I need to maximize, look at where do I bring value, where are my strengths, and then go from there.
Yeah. And just on this same vein, I'm in the midst of writing a summary ebook, which you know about, which is basically, highlights like from most of the episodes, about 64-ish episodes, so that people that have listened before or maybe aren't keen on listening to a 2-hour podcast can actually just consume the key highlights in 5 to 10 minutes. Having a lot of fun doing that, but it is a lot of work, and I pre-validated that. So I reached out to loads of my listeners and those that I've become friends with and over email and social media and said, are you interested? And then, I took pre-orders. And then I was like, okay, there's enough interest here. And now I'm doing it, rather than spending ages doing something and then you launch it and people are like, no, thanks. It's just,
we do this in science all the time. We do a pilot experiment. Okay, well, what are we looking at? Are the things that are changing, are they changing in the small sample? And if we get some results that validate that, okay, well, now it's time to go to a bigger experiment. And I think that's a savvy way to do it. It's also a way to reduce your risk in terms of, if you're looking to be highly productive, it's a smart thing to do, to plant a lot of little seeds and just see, okay, what's growing? Let me check on this. I think it's great to have a lot of passion about something and to go in full bore, but I don't think you ever do yourself a disservice by, testing the market a little bit and just seeing what's out there. I think this gives you the best chance for success. And also really saying, is this something that you want to be doing on a daily basis? Do you like the nuts and bolts of doing personal training on an every single day basis? Yeah. Or do you like interacting with people? It's exhausting to train 20 people a day, like I would do sometimes. Is that something that you see yourself doing long term? I think there's value in eliminating things that maybe you go, okay, this is not the best thing for me to do. There's a lot of value in that too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well said. And I just if people want to learn more about how to validate business ideas, there's a entrepreneur called Noah Kagan who's pretty big over there in Texas, Austin, Texas, and he's got this course on how you can learn how to validate and come up with your business ideas. So I'll link to that because I think it's really useful for not only people doing, because obviously a lot of people that listen to this podcast are high intensity training trainers who are trying to grow their business or start a business, but I think a course like that will give them the confidence to just pull the trigger and at least start testing their idea and see if people are interested. Okay, cool. So at the moment, you just have, I can only find the Facebook page for HitLab. Is there a website?
Yeah.
Or?
Well, we had a website for a while. Interesting thing about business is that if you actually you're onto something, you can get too much business. You can get too much and you can't fulfill it. So I just felt for me, it was better if I kept a minimal profile and only worked to the level I kind of was comfortable with. So I said, let me keep the Facebook page, but let me be more active in terms of like my community, the current people that I'm working with. All I really need to do is make sure that they're happy, and I'll get what I need in terms of the financial, outcome. So that was all part of kind of taking a step back and going, okay, I'm not, my level of growth what I'm looking for does not require this major footprint. And I really only need to do this amount. So keeping a little Facebook page and being active on Twitter, and really just, working with the clients, being receptive, being available, and not spending a bunch of money on advertisement, things that I can't even actually, I can't fulfill those, requirements. Even if I did want it, I couldn't do it. So I just said, okay, you know what? There's no shame in me doing only the amount I want to do. I don't need, so that was kind of the thought about it. I'm like, because to have a really nice website, I wasn't very tech savvy. So I was paying a ton of money every month to, have this website. I don't know how much action it's getting. I don't know how much it's driving business to me. I'm sure there's metrics for that, but I go, you know what? It's not, I didn't think it was necessary. And was necessary for me is to keep that personal relationship with the facilities that I did have up and running.
Yeah.
And, establishing those contacts where I go, hey, you know what, this month I want to do 5 tests. I want to do 5 VO2 max. I want to do 10 metabolic rate tests. Who's looking for business? Who needs me to, and that was all the legwork in the beginning. And now you kind of reap the benefits over the long term where you have people that will come back to you for services. So that was just kind of the model. And I go, this is the amount I want to do. This is what I'm happy doing. So that's where I've kind of gone with that.
Cool. Because
if people want to get in touch with me, they can find it. They can find it on Facebook. They can email me. I find that people will find you if they really want you. And those are the people that actually will come through and give you the business relationship you're looking for.
That's what Bill Day Simone calls breadcrumbs marketing. Stick with me that one.
That's great.
Yeah, no, it's cool because it sounds like you could scale it, but you still have to process the data. And I'm guessing that people have your expertise.
That's always been the issue, was how big can we make it? And what I found was I was a little bit disappointed by this in the business venture aspect of it, was that people, for better or for worse, they kind of wanted to always have me integrated into that because I was the one bringing the science to them, and I was the one that was doing the interpretation, and they wanted that person constantly. They wanted their guru, their expert. And, for scale purposes, like that's not something I can do or comfortable doing, on a big scale. I feel like it would be very challenging for me to do that. And I wasn't comfortable with that level of really sacrifice I'd have to make to do that. So could it be scale? I think it could be, but you need to have, it's that, that relationship you have with the facility owner, the trainer, and they kind of just want that person. And I go, you know what, this is maybe not a big scale business where it can do, maybe in somebody else's hands it would be. But for me, I just said, you know what, this isn't, I never considered myself an expert in business. So I just said, you know what, I'm kind of being taught a lesson right now. The market will kind of dictate what you want. And what it's telling me is that they want you to come in and do this. And that's what it was. So, and you just have to be comfortable with that at a certain point.
I totally respect that. Cool. Okay. So thanks for going through that. I think we've covered that off fairly well. I just wanted to transition over to some kind of bonus questions I ask a lot of my guests, which I think I sent over to you in advance. So I imagine you've got some sort of premeditated answers. If you don't, that's fine.
I'll try to make it sound not premeditated. It sounds very organic.
Even though you're reading off the screen.
Yeah.
So, what have you changed your mind about in the last year? I guess that would make sense to put that in a kind of exercise context.
Yeah, a big one. I think it's been the topic of a lot of your recent episodes has been the hypertrophy. The progressive overload is the key to hypertrophy kind of concept, and looking at some of the data that's come out of the labs at Ole Miss and looking at Stuart Phillips' data in Canada. Maybe the mechanisms of how we view hypertrophy are a little bit different, where you don't need to do very high loads to get hypertrophy. Although we do know it's a mechanism. We do know that people that do lift heavy weights can, increase muscle size. That definitely does happen, but that there's a different way to do it too. That maybe it's the mechanisms are involved in, simply going to failure. So that was something that was kind of paradigm shifting for me, because I was a big believer in that model. The data was pretty conclusive, not conclusive, but convincing. And the bigger studies that have been done looking at things more mechanistically have kind of, so I've changed my mind a little bit about that. And for exercise and high intensity exercise in general, have I changed my mind on a lot of things like that? I felt like the HIIT community was actually ahead of the times a little bit in terms of science and that. So, I think the hypertrophy question would be something I've changed my mind on.
Cool. Is there anything you believe to be true, but you can't prove it currently? Again, in exercise, I suppose. Yeah.
In exercise, I think for somebody, I look at things in terms of health and not maybe a little bit of performance, but in terms of health, metabolic health being a real key factor in your ability to lose weight and how fast you can lose weight at the level of if you're obese and you're trying to lose a lot of weight, or if you're trying to lose some cosmetic weight, 5, 10, 15 pounds, where you're just trying to get that last little bit out. I think that maybe I can't prove it now, but I'm definitely going to try is, people's metabolic profile, their phenotype, what do they seem to do well at? I think that there's something to that. Can't prove it right now, but I think in order to get to those goals, I think somebody needs to fix their metabolism first. And I think that exercise training, whether they'll do better on a high intensity training, moderate intensity training that's more frequent, I think that there's room for exploration in that. So that's something that I can't substantiate right now. There's no real data, but I think it's definitely something that needs to be looked at.
Cool. I think we touched on that a little bit with my episodes of Ryan Hall, a little bit. So I'll link to those so people want to learn a little bit more about that. Okay. This doesn't have to be health and fitness. This could be anything actually. So what books have you reread the most to yourself?
This is always a bad question to ask somebody that's in like academics, especially when you get your PhD, because you don't read anything for fun. But I like the Malcolm Gladwell books. The Outliers is a good one. Just kind of looking at things, on a grand scale, like what separates, people that have this extreme success in athletic endeavors or academic endeavors. Like, what are the things that correspond to that? And kind of dovetailing into that, I've recently read a book called The Sports Gene. That's, I find, very compelling. So those are the Outliers book. I've definitely reread a few times, but Sports Gene is a book I could probably see myself reading again too.
What's the kind of essence of The Sports Gene? Like, what did you get from that?
It's similar to, Outliers in terms of like what explains, greatness in terms of athletic accomplishment and strength and speed, all these physical things. Is it genetics? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Trying to get to that, because they've identified genes that correspond with great performance, but not everybody that has a great performance has the genes and vice versa. It's very interesting, kind of teasing out of the nature nurture thing, and looking at maybe there are multiple ways to get to the same endpoint. There's a great chapter about high jumpers and how one guy was a Swedish high jumper, and he was had this great success. He was an Olympic champion, trained, very dogmatically, had this incredible training regimen. And they had another guy who had equal heights of clearance, but literally was just like a pickup basketball player. Just had a great, so just really interesting stories about stuff like that.
That's really interesting. I'm going to ask you a question which I've totally not planned, and I do this quite a lot these days.
I'm not prepared for this.
It's again, it's a little bit off topic. But I was wondering, so I play basketball, as you know, and talking about like specificity within sports training, right? I don't know. Again, I don't know if this is outside your area of expertise, but I'll ask you anyway. It's like if you're training to play basketball, right, and you're playing indoors, and you're using, let's say, a leather ball, like I don't know, in your case, it'd be like a Spalding or something like that, right? Would then training outdoors, so you're now on concrete, and you're using a rubber ball, would that be detrimental potentially? If you're doing that, would it like befuddle that skill set? Do you reckon?
I think most people, when they, if you do any kind of looking at anything mechanistically in terms of like skill transfer, you got to look at like how long has somebody played basketball? If they played basketball for a really long time, and I'm not speaking from any level of expertise in terms of like the knowledge, transfer of skill or anything like that. It's more of like logically speaking, and some of the data that we've seen, the longer somebody plays basketball for, they'll probably adapt to it pretty quickly, and they probably won't be much loss of skill. I can imagine somebody that, only played, basketball outdoors at a certain kind of ball, and they only played for, 6 months, and then you transition them to a hardcore leather ball. There might be, but I think that the gross motor patterns and the skill sets are they're so general in terms of basketball. I don't think that there would be a tremendous loss of transfer. I think it's like if you had something very particular, that's where you might see some loss of transfer. But we're talking basketball in same rules, same court size. The goal is the same height. The ball weighs probably about the same. You're doing the same kinds of skills in terms of dribbling and things like that, and dunking, I'm sure in your case a lot. So that's,
I wish
that is, so I think that is probably probably not going to lose a tremendous amount because the gross motor patterns are just so ingrained in that sport.
Cool. It's just I've got back into basketball lately since moving to Ireland, and just loving it because I love seeing how the physical conditioning can transfer over. Like,
oh yeah,
I
was a gym rat growing up, and I did the same. I would, it's also a good way to explain your poor performance if you go between, you just say this is not the right court for me. But yeah, I can definitely see how you look at it that way.
It's funny because I posted something out recently saying that, I posted a picture of the 4-Hour Chef by Tim Ferriss, all about skill learning, and said, okay, I'm 30 years old. If I'm going to dunk, it's going to be now. And I haven't actually kicked the plan off yet, but I've kind of started putting a plan in place to have a go at that. And I emailed, this is the great thing about doing a podcast. I emailed Doug, Dr. Doug McGuff, and just said, hey, Doug, I'm thinking about doing this. What would you do? Obviously a little bit longer email than that. And he responded with basically a protocol, like a whole prescription on email to me. I was like, this is amazing. I'm not now telling everyone that they can do that because I'm not sure if Doug will be able to respond to everyone with their questions about strength training and sport and so on. As I know he's a busy guy, but that was so great. So I'm going to look at putting that into action at some point. Okay, so I guess last question, but related to reading again. Which book have you gifted or recommended the most to people that you talk to? I guess keeping it in the exercise context would be best.
Yeah. So this is not a very adventurous thing, but I taught undergrad exercise physiology for a while, and the most beneficial thing I felt to give them was to say, go back to the chapters of your biology textbook that you skimmed over and you said, I don't care about it. I'm not interested. And go back and reread those. A couple of years later, maybe you're a little more older, more mature, or you have a different perspective of life and you're really interested in science, go back and look at some fundamental stuff. And that will really help, like the concept of entropy in the universe and all those kind of components. And it really kind of contextualizes things and makes it say, okay, well, like, I don't need to memorize a bunch of facts. If I kind of can put some of these components together and keep them part of my repertoire, and I go, well, does this make sense? That's kind of the things that I recommend to people to read, is just go back and relearn some of the fundamentals, and then the things you learn that are a little bit more out there in terms of, we don't have real studies to prove them. You go, that's how you can kind of, you can fill in the gaps a little bit. And you go, okay, well, does this make sense? Am I going to get tricked this way? Or should I be invested in this? And go back and look at, the fundamentals. That's it's just like, in basketball, go back to your fundamentals. You want to improve your game, maybe not going to the most advanced thing possible, making sure your fundamentals are good. So always going back to the fundamentals is important.
No, that's really interesting because that reminds me when John Little first spoke to Dr. Doug McGuff. He Doug explained, I think he was talking about metabolic conditioning or something like that to John, and John said, let me go and check that in the textbooks and come back to you. So he actually validated it all in there, and then came back to Doug and said, you were 100% on the money. And then that's just before they started writing Body by Science together. And I think that's really interesting, being able to go back to those textbooks to kind of understand those fundamentals in all sorts of different disciplines. But just for the layman listening, if they wanted to get a really good understanding of, I guess, metabolism, let's say, for the sake of this, what textbook would you recommend that they go to get that fundamental? And secondly, I'm probably asking you too many questions now. How do we know that what you see as fundamentals is true? Is there still some stuff out there that's bullshit?
Yeah, well, I'll answer your first question. I like Metabolism at a Glance by, I think it's J.G. Salloway, and that's actually referenced in Body by Science. He uses some of the figures. Doug uses some of the figures from that. I think it's because it's these big pictures of how metabolic pathways, and then gives little tutorials on what's going on in this metabolic pathway. It's always the book I go to when I have to go, oh, what is this? What's going on with this? What's going on with the urea cycle? What's going on with protein metabolism, fructose metabolism? You might, I would say, if you have a basic understanding of what's carbohydrate, what's fat, it's a pretty good start. But you need to know some of those fundamentals. And how do you know what the fundamental knowledge are. It's over time. Remember, these textbooks have been written over a century, and what we see has been reproduced so frequently in terms of the fundamentals that's how you can kind of confirm it. It's the amount of evidence over time, the preponderance of evidence over time, that gives me the confidence that I need to go, okay, I'm comfortable with this. I think this is on the right track. That's why we do that's no one study is really the end all be all, because we need to see it reproduced over many times. That's when you can be comfortable with the science, is you see it pop up over and over again, not when it occurs in one study and it doesn't occur in another study. But if you have a balance of studies that shows you something, that's when you think you can be confident about it.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's really useful, because I know I'm so much more skeptical now in a healthy way, because I used to take way too much stuff on faith, and now I'm just a lot more kind of, just kind of retaining a healthy skepticism for any new ideas that I come across, rather than just like accepting them and then parroting them, which I used to do, which is not a good habit to get into.
Well, it's hard. The thing is, it's very difficult to prove or disprove these things. Science is not easy, and it's sometimes just easier to accept things at face value. But I think for people's sanity in general, just saying, like, taking a step back and going, okay, well, I've heard about this new diet pill, like what, and its claims, or I've heard about, this exercise method being the best method. It's like, it's not going to take that much effort to just go, okay, put down the fundamentals. Okay, what do we know? Download a review or an academic journal, or go look at a textbook, or, go to your local, university and look up somebody in the exercise science department, if you're lucky enough to have that, and say, what does the science tell me? Somebody that has no skin in the game in terms of being right or wrong on this. What is their perspective on this? So I frequently do that with an older professor of mine that, he's not doing a lot of research now, but he's done a ton in the past, and he's just kind of like my go-to person for, this is not the craziest concept, but where does this lie? Like, give me your perspective on it. Finding perspective from different people. I think that's what's great about your program, is you have all these different perspectives. And you go, okay, well, what do I think? And not only what do I think, and then am I comfortable parroting this with the knowledge that I have? Being careful, being cautious about, is this the right thing to be telling lots of people? That's always my thing. It's like, okay, I might not make a lot of recommendations because, you want to be sure. And if your degree of certainty is pretty high, that you can go ahead and say, okay.
Yeah, and I guess a long form podcast gives you the opportunity to give your whole viewpoint rather than like a soundbite, which makes, like, to your point, like you can't communicate the idea fully in that type of format. You need kind of like a long form type format for that. My person who you were just talking about there, my person for a lot of stuff is Dr. James Steele. I'll email him stuff that's totally got nothing to do with exercise, just for his opinion, because he's a really bright guy, and the way he thinks is very rational, and he kind of follows the scientific method, from what I understand of it, really very well, and that is very useful for me, and I obviously appreciate him taking the time to answer the questions I have. But that is one of the greatest things about, I guess, creating content, or a blog or a podcast, and helping guys like you and get your message out there, is you build these relationships up, and then it's not like, don't worry, Tim, I'm not going to be sending you emails every day, but like it's great to have that to help in the future. So
I think in terms of science advocacy, I want to be doing that, because I don't want somebody that I don't feel like knows what they're talking about, or they have a substantial stake on one side of the game to be right on this one side. If we're going to maintain funding for science and maintain, keep progressing society forward, science has become more important. Is such an important thing right now, but it's also being used so recklessly in the name of science, or whatever people are calling it. So I think that we need, as somebody that's in academics and research, we need to be out there talking to people and allowing to hear their views. And there's something called citizen-driven science. Okay, well, what kind of questions do people in the public have? What can we answer these? Are they important? Are they not important? Or are they, just to sell things? Or, can we actually gain some things from that? So I love having the back and forth with people because, I feel like it gives me a chance to kind of step into the public and share ideas. And since I was a part of, the industry for so long, I can say, okay, there may be some validity to this. And coming out of the tower, so to speak, actually does help, because then you have a more informed public. And if you have a more informed public, we're going to make better decisions about things in general, medicine, technology. I think it's a part of our job now. We don't have the luxury of just sitting behind our computers and our desks and our lab benches anymore. So,
yeah, here. Cool. Okay. So, Tim, best way for people to contact you and find out more about you?
Find me on Twitter at AllertonXFizz, and just through my personal email at timallerton@gmail.com is perfectly fine.
Cool. And after both of these episodes are published, your Twitter feed is going to explode, and hopefully you're going to have hundreds of followers. So to all those listening, to find this episode, the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.org. And until next time, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Before you head off, head on over to corpwarrior.com to get your free ebook with 6 interview transcripts with some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill Simone, on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. These transcripts are not verbatim, deliberately. Instead, they've been transcribed in an easy read format to make it more enjoyable and easier for you to quickly pick out what you need and start getting results. To get your ebook, head on over to corpwarrior.com, that's CORP warrior.com, and enter your email address. Then check your email for an email from me with a confirmation link. Once you click the link, you will be instantly redirected to a PDF version of the transcripts.